about acting and where I'm coming from with it, because I realized as I was putting together this information that we all have our own idea of what acting is, and just because I've been living and breathing it, I wanted to share that information with you guys. So I'm a film and television based actress. I'm based in Austin, and I love theater as well, but it sort of takes a sort of chunk of time, so I've chosen this other way. So I'm going to be speaking from techniques basically that are from the television and film world, which it's a little different than theater. And so as an actor, I learned very quickly that all I really have when I book a role or even audition is I have a script, which is the bones, and a director's promise, which I may or may not have seen their work. They may be starting out and we're working together for the first time as well. And so I realized really quickly that I need to figure out what makes a great story. And so I started writing scripts and studying screenwriting. So like, how can I know if this is gonna work? Because I'd be in a scene with a script that someone wrote, and for some reason I would feel like it just wasn't flow, or there was something, or the character didn't work out, or didn't turn out to be something that I could really work. It was really juicy, and then I didn't know why. So that's when I started writing. So then one of my scripts actually segued into a novel. So I'm in the middle of writing my first novel. So I feel like this is so exciting because I've had to actually break down what I take from my background and what I'm bringing to the page, because they are very different styles of communication, but at the same time they're very similar in getting into the character and absorbing them and getting into their world. So that's where I'm coming from. And so Matt handed them out. Great. So on the front is essentially a really simple description of acting. What is acting? And then it's when an individual takes on the role, behavior, attitudes of another person, perhaps in a scripted environment like a play or film. That's super technical, right? Just bare bones. But then this person, I really like the way they described it a little more. These are some of the things to think about. If acting is merely pretending to be someone else, then anyone can do it. As a matter of fact, we all do it every day. And this is where I think it gets interesting, that a writer can do this as well. An actor just does it in the context of a group and with more people around. But you can actually, so he says, seriously, can you actually get through a day without a moment of acting, of pretense? Perhaps you're not pretending to be someone else, but how often in a day do you pretend? How often do you hide your truth? As if, for example, how often do you pretend to be pleased or disappointed or interested? How often do you hide your impatience, annoyance, anger, or fear? We all do this. It is a central part of the human condition, and sometimes it's a matter of survival. Pretending is a technique we use to maneuver the rapids of daily existence, and this makes us all actors to an extent. So we could discuss these moments when we're accused of acting or faking it, pretending or lying, and you know how often you get recognized when someone is not being authentic, honest, or truthful. So acting is a part of our lives every day. And there's nothing wrong with this either, right? Like you said, it's about survival as well, and figuring, like right now I'm acting like a speaker, I'm acting like, and hopefully not with a pretense that I know any more than anyone else, because we're all learning, but that's the world. Like, I'm very different here than I might be, I don't know, messing around watching a show or something like that. And I think that's really important to understand, because I think when I talk with people about acting who have never acted, it seems that the assumption is sometimes that actors become someone else, like they actually leave themselves to then put on the shell of another person, so they don't actually have the responsibility of that. And I want to share that it's actually very responsible and very internal, and actually an actor has to be in that world of that person in order to do it truthfully. I'm assuming that this is like, we're talking about good acting. In order to move the audience. I mean, you've all seen performances that move, and then you've all seen performances that don't move you. And so more likely than not, the ones that don't move you, that actor is probably showing you what they think that person is, instead of sort of being it and really taking on their characteristics, not being the judgment of the character, like really almost falling in love with them. You almost need to do. And that's something that we'll go into a little further in detail. So that's essentially the kind of world I wanted to go over that just so that we're in the same kind of arena of thinking with what acting is. There's two techniques that I use, and this isn't really as important as some of the other things I want to talk about, but in case you're wondering, I use what's called the Meisner technique. It's one of several popular American techniques. And then I also work with a coach for specific roles doing it doesn't really have a popular name, but it's doing dream work. So kind of tapping into the inner self and the inner consciousness to find out the struggle of the character. So like, how can, I've never been divorced, but what can if I was playing a character that was, what can I draw from that's truthful to me that can bring out all of the emotions that come through with that kind of experience, you know what I mean? Rather than like assuming, oh, divorced people do this, and it just wouldn't be real. You can tell when something's real or not. And so on the back of the sheet are some points that I'm going to go through. And I wrote down some notes for myself so that I can be sure to hit certain points, but I'm going to try to keep it as organic as possible. Actually, should I ask, do you guys have any questions about what I've said already? Hi there. Hi. And by the way, also, I'm really glad you guys showed up on this rainy day. That's like so commendable to you. And I want to make sure that I have a lot to cover that I'd like to cover, but I'm really interested in your questions as well. So I could just move through it and then we can go to Q&A. Yes.
I find that when people think of actors, it really is, in my opinion, very entrenched that they're just pretending.
Yeah.
Well, they just pretend. Hey, I'm happy. No, I'm sad. But I'm sure there's way more to it than that. But
yeah.
That bias, I think, is very ingrained in people who don't know the process of what.
Yeah. Do you want me to speak to that? Well, I think I might cover this in one of these points, and then let me know if I didn't, because it's important. You're right. Because I think that all of what I'm about to share does also translate to writing, as I've found. There are some things that don't, or I found that they weren't very important, so I've kind of distilled this for you. One of the most important things is staying in the moment. So what that means is, rather than listening to what is being said, most people are thinking ahead of what they say, of what they want to say, and acting the way they think they're supposed to. So this goes back to, we're all kind of acting in different scenarios, and so staying in the moment is the practice of not, basically just getting out of your head is what it is. And I think as writers, that is important as well. I mean, it's key. It's kind of a how, right? You're there with your keyboard or your pen and paper, and like all you have is your head. You don't have some other person to bounce something off of. But I think you can still, I think that, I'm trying to find a way to stay in it and infuse my writing with that philosophy. I want to share this quote that I found about staying in the moment that I think really explains it. So think about the hidden things in your story whenever two characters interact, and see how you can use them to add tension and energy. For example, suppose you have a father meeting a son for the first time. The mother has agreed to this meeting on the condition that the father does not reveal the truth. In what ways would the father act differently under these conditions that he might otherwise? In what way does the strain of the secrecy come out in the dialogue, in the father's actions? What tension does the son pick up on? What tension does he miss entirely? Thinking in this way, exploring the what's between in your story and how you can use it to build tension and character, will add that extra dimension and depth in your scenes. So that works so well for acting and for writing. I feel like that's just like a juicy nugget of information. Those are the kinds of things that actors they work really hard to get out of their heads to be able to explore this. Sometimes an actor will use what's called an actor's secret. Like if a scene isn't an actor's secret is something that the actor knows that may or may not actually even be true in the story. It may be something you discover down the line. It may just be something that they need to make the stakes higher. But let's say they don't have this in their story. Two people are meeting at a restaurant, and they're having a conversation that one of them wants to break up with the other one, let's say. And let's say that they play it a few times and it's just not really that juicy, like it's just sort of falling flat and they're not sure why. Before they come in, or even during the rehearsal, an actor might decide, okay, you know what, I'm going to play this like let's say a female, obviously, I'm going to play this like I'm pregnant and I didn't tell them. And think about what kinds of things might stir up emotionally. Like I'm just imagining it right now. It's like, I mean, that puts a whole world of things behind my eyes, behind someone's eyes. Like, and then the man is like picking up on something weird and he's not really sure, and she's not going to tell him. I mean, it just gets so juicy. And I think as writers, that could be something that you can give one of your characters, like your character's secret. And it may be by the scene, it may be scene by scene, but I don't know if I recommend that, because then you have all kinds of secrets for different scenes and that's just confusing. But I wanted to make sure to share that one, because for me, in my practice, that's always been something I can rely on. Like, really, okay, the stakes don't feel high, as in I'm feeling a little flat in this interaction. And you can always tell when you're writing when something is feeling flat. So give them a secret, and that will probably, most possibly, fuel, the thread of their energy throughout the entire story. This is something. Don't judge your characters. This is something that is most common with the villain, right? And I say in quote because villains don't think they're villains. They have perfectly justified reason for doing what they're doing, right? Let them be themselves and let yourself go there with them, no matter how uncomfortable. So the reason I say this is because I know this comes up with writing, and maybe even more so with acting, because you are the face of this character. Like in writing, it's sort of, you can still, I'm not saying you don't own the characters, but when I'm writing, I notice there's still there can be a distance. Let me try to explain this. When I first started acting, I didn't realize that I was judging my characters until I would start to play these characters, and then my coach would say, okay, what do you think about them? And I would say these things that were kind of critical commentary, and it's like, okay, you're judging this person, is that a judgment, or is that really where you're coming from? And so what I'm suggesting is, if a character is hard to communicate, or if it feels a little stunted, or if the villain is just sort of, you feel like he or she is just sort of showing up like, aha, like that kind of thing, like it's feeling stereotypical, maybe bringing in, I don't know, a villain's secret could be interesting. Like maybe they have something that they really just, like Hitler wanted to be an artist, that kind of thing. Like that could bring in some juicy stuff. That was something that really changed the game for me, was don't judge the characters. Because one story's villain is another story's hero. So it might even be interesting to explore what the villain's hero story is, playing around with morals and perspectives that's other than your own. So the other point I want to make is writing a draft is like a rehearsal. And so with rehearsal, no one is filming yet. It's not locked into film. So play. Like that's the time to play. And I feel like my first draft anyway, I tend to make it so like serious, like, this is my masterpiece, and I forget that, wait a minute, I haven't even played around yet. Like it's so much easier to pull something back in boldness, I guess is what I want to say. It's so much easier to pull something back than it is to push it out. So like the harder we push the boundaries and push the limitations of the character, You might go too far, but at least you know what's too far. And we can never really know what's too far until you go just past that. So every draft is like a rehearsal, might as well play. Ultimately, let yourself go. Even ridiculous. I mean, it's fun, too, being ridiculous, I think. Yeah. That's all I want to say about writing a draft is like a rehearsal. So the next point is that each actor brings their unique voice to a page. So what that means is that have you ever heard about famous movies or big movies that you've seen and you're like, oh wow, this other actor almost got that role. How different would that be, right? Well, everyone, even similar looking people and similar people with similar mannerisms will always bring something unique to that role. And so that's the same with you. And I know that this may or may not have been said so many times, but I just wanted to remind everyone that we all have this unique voice, and I have to remind myself, even if something seems like something, and we're all everything is derivative too, you know, and so, but the way that you do it is unlike the way anyone else could ever do it, because you're you. And honoring that, I think, is important, because it helps with acting. It helps me get out of my head and say, you know what, I can't actually do someone else even if I tried. You know what I mean? Like, you can't really be. So then what's the problem? You know, how can? So one of the notes that I wanted to make sure to communicate is that how can writers allow from that element of surprise? So we already do inherently, as we're all different people. We bring a uniqueness that no one else can replicate. Another important note: supporting roles. This is one of the things one of the reasons I started studying screenwriting is because, you know, when I was beginning, I was getting a lot of supporting roles, and I would find that these supporting roles, they're just, in Austin, there's a lot of indie film, and so there's a lot of people that are kind of doing their first or second or fifth scripts, whatever level. Everyone's learning, and we're at different. Actually, I find this with even Hollywood scripts. The supported roles tend to get diluted or not well thought out. And I'm seeing that for my own story as well, for my own book. And so I wanted to communicate some things about this that I know from acting that might help with those supporting roles in your stories. So, you know, never forget about them. Think of each supporting as another story's hero. So again, like the villain, what if each of your supporting characters have their own heroic story? I mean, okay, so here's an example. You all came from your own lives and your own day, your own situation, and now you're here, and we're all, like, you all have super rich, juicy lives outside of here, right? And so you come here, and so we're all kind of playing supporting roles for each other right now in lives, you know what I mean? But we come from this rich past, and so how can we honor these supporting characters as much as we'd honor somebody sitting next to us? You know, it's like, hey, what can I learn about you today? You know, that I like to go to social situations like that anyway, because I think we're all awesome. So.
Shelly, I have an offer for you at the buy counter. Shelly, you're on.
I wrote notes thinking that I wouldn't cover it, and I did. So good. Hey. Another point is, don't force the action if it doesn't feel right. You know, acting, if you try to force what a character is supposed to do, it falls flat. We've all seen it. It's memorably what we often generalize as bad acting. I don't really like to use that term, but it's common and it communicates what I'm trying to say. Most likely, the actor, if you see the performance and you're just not buying it, you know, you're just not in it, I think most likely the actor may be trying to show you the character instead of living through it and being the character. This often comes from maybe different levels of training, but also from not feeling secure in the character, which can come from not playing around with them enough or doing enough research. This is right? This isn't the only scenario. I'm just sharing this because the more research I do with my characters, the more comfortable I start to feel with them going off on their own. You know what I mean? So if you ever see, I wanted to share in the film world. If you ever see a big budget film that hasn't been fine-tuned edited yet, you will notice that even great actors, poorly edited, can appear not so great. So I suspect this is similar with writing and editing our work. Less is more most often. Cut out the non-essentials for the best, most fluid performance. So there were sort of 2 points underneath. Don't force the action. It's let it be and let it come out fluidly, but also maybe less is more. And I think with acting and writing both, when you let yourself push the boundaries, you find a boundary and you're like, okay, I want to rein it back. I think also then you find what's not necessary. Anything that feels like a struggle still is probably not necessary, and we don't need it in order to move forward. We don't need it anymore. So on my own journey with writing, I'm having trouble because I critique my work before it's even past the first draft. And that's like critiquing the first time I did a scene. Of course, you just did it. Like the very first time, it's rarely ever amazing after the first time, unless you've been working with those people together all the time, or know that character. If you're in a TV show and you've been doing it for 5 years, yeah, sure, your first scene is going to be awesome with that character. But that reminds me just to be patient, and just go, okay, there's plenty of techniques and down the line in order to make this character come out, or there might be some new discovery near the end, but it's not, let the first draft be. Just let it be. When you don't remember what happened, it was probably amazing. That's happened to me a few times. As an actor and a writer, actually, I've gotten into what I've heard is called flow state. That's with artistry, and you don't necessarily call it that with acting, but I understand it. When you find yourself like, what happened? Sometimes it's a little freaky. It's like, especially if you just did as an actor, if you just did a scene and you're like, did I do anything embarrassing? Because you want to know, because you weren't there, because you're so, this goes back to sort of preparing and knowing that character, and that character then you truly just become a conduit for that person to speak and live and breathe. And when that happens, I'll tell you, all of that work becomes worth it. And I'm sure it's the same with writing. Part of me wants to live there, and then part of me is glad that I don't live there, because you do have to sort of have that balance. But when it comes, it's just so juicy, and that happens with acting as well. And I think however we can set ourselves up for letting that happen, I think we're all just better humans too. I think we're designed to create and be creators. Personally, I've found grounding, like doing at least a 10-minute grounding meditation, like having all the energy go down into the ground, helps me to be that conduit when I'm acting. And I'm actually doing that before I write as well, especially like an intense writing session. I feel like it helps because it's through our body, even if it's coming out in our fingers. Another point is that a strong character want in a scene is something that actors, I don't really know about the other methods. I'm just speaking from Meisner mostly. But when you get a scene, and it may or may not have even, it may just be the scene and you don't know anything about the character or even the story, you can make up a want for that character, even if you don't know anything else about them except for one page of dialogue, even if it's not even really saying that much. And that makes everything so much more. We talked about stakes before, so that makes the stakes higher. Like, what does your character want? And the character may not want what they say they want. So reading into the lines and understanding the subtext is super important. That goes back to when I talk about, how we're all acting all the time. There's subtext in a lot of things, and that's okay too. A lot of times, but understanding and listening for it, I think has made me a better actor. It's maddening too, right? You're just like constantly seeing what's really going on? You're like, I want to go back. But yeah, Ed does the Meisner work with me, so he's laughing extra hard because you train yourself to sit with different people in the room, and you're just noticing what's going on. And I think we all have that intuition that any actor does. We all do. But for the very same reason, I sometimes wish I don't have the skills that I've developed. That's the reason why I think we tend to we just let it go. And maybe how do I explain? See, explaining acting is really tricky. It really is. Let me come back to that point and finish this, and it might actually come out in one of your questions. It might actually come out in your question. Embrace the messy. Some of the best acting happened when things went messy in a scene. And by messy, I mean not as planned. It's when you see it, so I'm speaking of class in particular, but also on set, it's terribly disappointing when an actor stops themselves in the middle of a scene because of something they didn't anticipate. So the actor stops the scene because something they didn't anticipate happens. But chances are that's their moment. Like, that's when it's probably at its best, because you're not up here, because you can't be, because the prop broke and you have to figure out how to keep making it going, right? Yeah.
There's in the Lord of the Rings, when Aragorn kicks a thing, they've been chasing after the hobbits, right, in the Two Towers, and he actually breaks his toe. And I think in the script he's supposed to express some frustration. There's this frustration.
Yeah.
It's pretty intense.
Beautiful.
He actually broke his toe.
Yeah.
I mean, there was like, that's what you just said.
Yeah.
That's pretty messy. They gave him a really great howl.
And so you could tell, like,
You couldn't tell that he broke his toe, but it's just like.
But you could tell, like, yeah.
He channeled whatever was coming out of his toe into the frustration he was supposed to be showing, I guess.
Yeah, that is a perfect example.
That's really poignant what you said, because that's when acting blurs the line between what is acting and what is reality.
Yeah.
When an actor, maybe the actor didn't break their toe, but they're so in the moment
He definitely
that
really broke
that
his
the
toe.
emotion is that they broke their toe.
Oh, she's saying he really did break his toe.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But he's like, so he's an actor and he's thinking, okay, now I'm going for this howl or this expression of frustration, and so I'm going to kick this thing, and he broke his toe, and it's like, he was already moving towards frustration, I guess.
Yeah. Well, and that's great because he went with it. So you have the footage of this real thing that happened, right? Instead of him being like, hold on, stop everything. I mean, of course, if you severed your leg, stop the set,
Stopped immediately afterwards.
Yeah.
They didn't make him keep working all day.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think I was going to show there's actually a more overt example of that. I don't know if you guys saw Django Unchained, but Leonardo DiCaprio cuts his hand in the middle of the scene. He keeps rolling, and he actually uses the blood coming out of his hand as a prop in the scene, and it wasn't scripted at all. And it turns out it was his best scene, probably, in the movie.
I remember seeing that recently. Yeah, good examples. Oh, I'm glad you guys are seeing these things, because it's not that the writer needs to go there in particular. I just think that knowing those things and remembering or being reminded of them, I think could help us somehow get into the character. I mean, there is a thing called, so when I was researching acting, there's things that I know that I sort of that wanted to make sure you guys knew, and then I'm like, well, what else is out there of acting tips for writers? A lot of various stuff, but there's also method writing, which I don't know if I do that on purpose anyway. Like my story is set in where there's a renegade mermaid as the main character, so I go swimming more, and get into the world. I got shells everywhere, and actually I even researched how to buy mermaid tails just because I thought it would be fun. But that's, I don't know, that's a possibility for anyone. I guess I'm just hoping to possibly inspire new ways of thinking about, we all get stuck in our way of doing things. I'm actually looking for a new acting style to practice and learn, because I think we can become a mix of everything, or we can find our craft through a mix of everything. You don't have to do one thing. So great, I'm glad you guys resonated with that. So just two more. Acting in improv class. Improv in particular, I think, is the most approachable right away. Highly recommend it. That's actually something that everybody says on all the blogs too. Like, take an improv class. It helps you stay in the moment. It helps you have fun in your life too. I mean, it's just fun. It helps to understand. Mostly, it helps me get out of my head. It helps you kind of understand pacing, and like, especially with comedy, there's a split second when something's funny and then it's not funny anymore, because you can kind of I mean, it's a split second, and that can we can work with that with our writing as well. But honestly, they're just plain fun. And I will mention that level 1 improv classes are designed for people that have never ever done it before. So if you go into a level 1, it's totally like step by step by step, which is awesome. I took them to an improv class, and you've never been before, and you had fun.
Yeah.
You didn't want to go, but you had fun. Keep passing the energy. So improv. In a scene, actors may strive to keep the energy going, as in not check out themselves. That's part of staying in the moment and staying present. It's a practice. Between people, even if there is little to no action, there is always some kind of interaction. I mean, one great example is right now. You guys are listening and watching, but there's a lot going on in the room, and that's great. And that's all I really need to say about that. I mean, what is the subtext of their words and and mostly the interaction, right? I think that's what I can work on in my stories with my characters. What's happening? What's happening that's not being said? But also, going back to supporting roles, what happened to that supporting role character? When something's happening in a scene and they're supposed to be over here, and then did we just leave them to stand there? I've been that actor, by the way, where I'm like, okay, so I'm just here, like this whole scene, like we're just here. It's not right or wrong. It's just, I'm just saying, if it's hard to act, it probably is hard to feels forgotten as a character to like reader as well. When there's an opportunity to juice, I use the word juicy a lot. I'll just use the word juicify. There's an opportunity to juicify with your supporting roles. Yeah. I wanted to stop or end this with some tips that from my acting coach that are just really memorable. Actually, I'm just gonna give you 2 to keep it simple. Stay focused on the other person and get out of your head. And the other one is, don't make it so effing precious. And what that means is, you have your scene, and we just want to make it just like either, and this comes from also being uncomfortable with the character, and not playing it enough times or something, but I find myself still wanting to milk a part that I have, and what that comes from, when I say milk a part, I mean like stay in part of the scene a little longer than is necessary, because I feel comfortable in that part and I might not be looking forward to another part. I think as writers, we definitely can do that. I've been doing it, just sort of, I'll just keep working on, I do it with characters mostly, like I'll just keep working with this character because they're fun, they're comfortable, like I know them, But what can happen with making it precious is that how do I explain that? It's not, life is messy, and that's awesome and readable and worth communicating still. And what if we just let our writing be messy too? What if because clean it up in the editing, but maybe you don't even need to clean it up, especially if it was something you didn't remember writing. Like that's flow, that's being a conduit, that's letting it go. And I think that's the ultimate in creation, is being able to just let it go. And unfortunately, it takes a lot of work to be able to let it go. I mean, been doing this for a while, and it's taken a while. And now that I'm just started in the writing realm, been doing it for about 1.5 years, I feel like still a baby, and there's so much to learn, and I respect both crafts thoroughly. So super excited to be able to talk with you guys about this. That's my spiel so far, but really I'm looking forward to your questions, because I don't know what you might be wondering about this, about acting, or comments about things that you see for yourselves, Yeah.
I have always wondered how actors can show up at the theater night after night for years and perform in a play and bring something alive to it. And I'm wondering if there is something in that would help us look at our own writing with fresh eyes.
Would you like me to share the question?
Sure,
for you?
yeah.
Okay. The question is about theater actors and how they show up night after night after night with this just as much energy and vibrance in their performance, and how. So I would honestly, I don't do as much theater. I've never done a play year after year after year, but what I can speak to is that you still come on to set not feeling it that day, or not feeling like you think you should. And I think for me, what I've been trained to do, and what I feel like is most valuable, is to bring the truth of whatever it is that day, because your emotions deceive you. That's another thing that my acting coach always says. And I never understood it at first. It used to piss me off. So I'm like, what do you mean they deceive me? And then of course that's the moment they're deceiving me, because I'm trying not to get angry, and I am. But is that two things you can do. Stay honest with what you're feeling and use it. So even if it's supposed to be super happy scene and you're just feeling, you just broke up with your guy or whatever it is that day, right? And it just does not feel authentic to be happy. Every actor is going to have a different answer, but I'd say find a way to honor what's really there, because if you don't, and you get out on the stage, and you really are trying to put a mask on and act happy, but really then it probably will go into some sort of sadness in that moment, I want to give you something really solid and tangible to use. It's a great question. Are there any other Ed, you're an actor. Jason, have you?
Yeah, I think I can add a little bit.
Yeah,
to
please.
That, where you were going, and it comes back to your want in a scene. So maybe I want to get money from somebody. There are a million ways I can go about getting that money from a person. So the want is the money from you. There's this idea of intention, the action that I'm going to take to get that money. So I could seduce you to try to get that money. I could intimidate you. Those are very different actions that I can take. And on a day where maybe I'm not feeling too terribly sexy or powerful and I'm angry or whatever it is, maybe intimidation is the way to go. And that would be one way to maybe honor what it is that you're coming to the table or to the computer with, and because the character still has the same want, just they may be acting a little bit different that day.
Mm-hmm. And especially, thank you. That was a great addition. And because what I'm now thinking is that even if you have a really traumatic thing happening, you're still going to get your want. You just come at it a different way. Then that's just acting talk, but then there's talking about, are you going to change anything up that anyone else needs to know about, that kind of thing. Yeah. Thank you. Did that answer some?
It did.
Good. Hey.
So my question is about getting out of your head. Do you have any specific techniques or practices? I know you talked about grounding, which is like a meditation, right?
Yeah.
Are there any other things that you particularly use also in writing?
The grounding is the one major one that I also use in writing. The acting technique that I study is truly can only be done in the context of a community in a group with others. It's a repeating. It's a series of, well, the beginning of it anyway is a series of repetition, calling sort of what's there in the moment, what the behavior is in the moment. That's not something I recommend to writers necessarily, but that is what I do. Improv can help one get out of one's head, because it just doesn't work in your head. Like, you'll find out pretty fast. But it's also, there are such great improv teachers here in Austin. There's such a big improv scene, but like I said, a beginner's class is very nurturing, very easy. That I think shows up in every other area of your life. You know. Another one would be to let yourself get, push those boundaries, because I find that as an actor, when I'm in my head, I'm in some sort of ego space of what I think I should look like, which means I'm worried about what I'm looking like, which means you're not going to get a great performance and I'm not going to feel good, that kind of thing. And so one of the things I can do is just take a scene, especially when a scene's feeling stale and I have to have a little extra rehearsal time, just take it to a ridiculous level and let it go and have fun with it. And it helps. That might be another thing, getting in your body somehow. I know when I'm writing, you just kind of there in a world, in a physical state that's probably very similar. So what if you actually shifted your body or laid down and typed like this on the floor or something like that? I think that's maybe something you could bring to an acting world, is it shift your body in some way. Because if you want to create a character, some people, the first thing they go to is they create how they walk. They create how they stand. And when you start to mimic how someone else stands or play with that, like, you really start to feel like a different person. And how that relates to getting out of your head is just getting out of what's normal in any way. Yeah.
Totally. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Any other question? Yeah.
For instance, I guess with that, as more of a writer than an actor, getting into the character's head, like reading it out loud, when I'm like, or when I'm writing a scene that doesn't feel like it's coming out authentic, I stop writing and I actually start having a conversation. I talk to myself out loud. I don't know what's past, so I just say scenes out loud, and speaking them gives me an actual physical perspective that seems more authentic than a teacher.
I love that. Thank you. I'm gonna repeat a little bit of that for the audio, but the getting into the character's head helps her get out of her head. And you reminded me of something that actually I do with characters that I'm playing with through the dream work that I do. It's called free association, and essentially it is not talking to the characters, writing to the characters as if it's like a Q&A, like me and then the character's name, and they'll answer, question, answer, question, answer. And actually there's some really interesting, I'm so glad you said that, because you inspired me to remember that is definitely where to go, or where I go when I need to understand the truth of a character. And I'm just in my head about the plot and what they look like, and how to craft my sentences and all of those things. That's actually really powerful. Carl Jung, it's very Jungian, this dream work, and I recommend looking him up with intentions of using some of his tools for writing. I think it could be really powerful if you're into that kind of thing. Everyone's got their own kind of interests, but thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Anything else? I love hearing about you guys. And even a comment. Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious to hear your thoughts. I know this talk is about ways that writing and acting are similar, but what are just some of your thoughts on how they're different?
Oh, how acting is different from writing. There's a lot. The most important way is to know that's really hard to bring to my writing is that personal interaction, because you can't take an acting class by yourself, and so you need other people to play off of and work with. And that actually informs, I think we talked about, focusing on the other character, the other person actually helps keep you out of your head. And so that's something that truly you can't get only as a writer. That's one of the reasons why I might suggest improv, because it takes out, you don't have to learn lines, you don't have to, understand a script or get into character. You don't even have to be a character if you don't want to, but it helps you get into your body and also see other characters. Like, you might be influenced by someone across from you, and that might give you an idea. If you'd be like, hold on, I have to write that down, that personal eye contact interaction with a character, with another character, is the main thing, and everything that involves. Like, so putting them into your body, being, the physical putting them into your body, then the voice, what does their voice sound like? Do they have a slight limp? What are their values? But living it and breathing it. So it's similar, because as a writer, you're creating all of that, and you're communicating that, but then acting is that putting all of that into your body. So the fact that, I hope this is communicating, because it's a really deep question, and I'm having to rethink what I do, in order to communicate this.
It's like as you're writing your character, what are you doing differently in writing your character that you do or don't do when you're acting?
That's so when I started writing, I actually didn't describe the character very much, because I took it for granted that I could just be it or something. And I come from that mindset of like, well, I'll just be it. Like, that's what. And so having to write out this character is actually a challenge for me. But I don't know, you do both, or there's some people that do both and have been doing both for a while, acting and writing, and I'm interested to hear whether you do that or not in your own work, anyone else?
I'll just add, very similar.
Okay.
That I try to avoid as much as possible describing what characters look like, and but it comes from screenwriting and it comes from acting. That it's just.
Oh yeah, screenwriting especially.
You never know who's going to get hired, so you don't know what they look like.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a hindrance or something with us, that we're not, maybe it's a boundary that we should jump over or something.
Yeah, I was surprised that I just didn't. I mean, I was all in the thoughts and the plot and things that are happening, but yeah. So it's actually a hurdle, in a lot of ways.
Maybe on the flip side, writers spend too much time describing their character and not enough time being their characters, right?
Yeah,
so they're all surface.
That's interesting. I have some friends who are animators, and they do both. So they manipulate everything on screen to make it happen, but they'll actually run, especially when they're stuck or even when they're starting, they'll run into the room, videotape themselves being that character, and then plug that into the machine, and then that helps them communicate it. So we got a few things. Did you have a question first? I'm sorry.
I'm gonna add a little bit on that, the idea of, spending time describing your character or not. I think the overly describing your character, I think is very common with early writers, right? But you spoke before about how when you want to get into a character as an actor, right, you kind of make yourself think, what is his past, what's his story, despite it being on the script or not. And I think it's something very similar that writers can benefit from is, well, don't invest too much time in telling me what your character's story, or maybe even telling me what he looks like. Let that come subtly, throughout as you write the story. If you know your character, it's going to come out in the way that he acts, and you'll be able to say a lot more of him in a much more interesting way than if you were simply to write it out, rather than say perhaps that he's very strong. Well, you'll see that in some action that he performs, or in the way that he moves himself. His very space within a room and how you describe his movement will say something about it, and that allows the reader to actually create it rather than you just hand it to him. I think it makes it even more personal for the reader.
That's interesting. That's great. Thank you. Because I'm thinking back on The Secret, The Actor's Secret, and you could have the character secret in your book, and you may or may not ever reveal what that is. But it just might be something, when you talk with someone or communicate with someone every once in a while or regularly, and something's going on, you're not quite sure. You're like, okay, wait, 3 times, and there's this, and so we pick up, and it's kind of fun, like clue finding. On what you're saying. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
When you said that about the animator who would run in and videotape himself, that just suddenly made me remember there's a PBS documentary about Charles Dickens, and apparently he had a big mirror over his mantelpiece in the room where he wrote, and every now and then he would jump up and he'd stand in front of the mirror and make funny faces and make funny voices, and then he'd rush back and sit down. And he has a lot of his characters do have really odd mannerisms and funny voices and funny walks.
Oh.
Apparently that's how he would add physicality to his
I love
writing.
that.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah.
That would be being ridiculous.
That's right.
No one has to see that, That's a difference too. You can be ridiculous and no one never has to leave the room, but as an actor you kind of had to do it on camera. Yeah. These are great comments. Thank you.
Yeah. Also, I can see why a writer. It's a lot of responsibility as a writer when you have 2 characters to suddenly honor those characters and actually have to get into their individual feelings and actually know what they're feeling, which would indicate the dialogue that you're about to write. That's a big responsibility. It'd be easier just to write what's on the surface. I hate you. I love you. I don't like you. That's words.
Yeah.
But if they really get into each character, then the dialogue will then come from that. So that's a big responsibility, and I can see why you wouldn't want to do that. It goes back to what you were saying. You have to force yourself to have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, and another difference with writing and acting is that in acting, it's great to be able to explore, and I try and strive to explore the feelings and emotions of what's going on in the moment, right? Rather than I'm going to be angry, it ends up being a show of angry. And so going to write a book like that, like I'm just going to let that unfold, it's a little bit different because I guess if you're in that flow state, all of it comes together just like it does in a good scene. But it seems like you'd have to be in control a little bit more with book writing or with writing than with acting in order to let those emotions unfold. Because you can't edit your scene. I guess you could. Sorry, not writing. I meant with acting. Like when you're acting, you can't kind of go back. And then there's editing it. This is such an interesting subject to talk about and think about. I'm negating myself, but also coming up with new ideas. Yeah. Or Ed, you had something too.
No, it's just all of college, my main writing professor, his thing that he drilled into everybody was show, don't tell. So don't tell me that person's face was red, say that person was flushed, it's beyond describing the person, the inside of every single character. Whereas, like, if you're acting somebody, you are that character. But if you're writing everybody, it's like you're God almost. You know everybody's secrets, and you know what one person doesn't know, or what one person doesn't know that they don't know yet, and how that's changing everything. Like, you have to draw to everybody that you're creating.
Yeah.
The world.
Yeah, that's a good point. Because that's what you don't get the benefit of as the actor. I guess, I'm just thinking, I'm going through, like, even a feature, even if you're part of a whole feature, or if you're just part of a scene, you still are responsible for your characters being with that other person, and that hopefully that other person surprises you. But if you're God, then nothing really surprises you anymore. So how do you allow for those surprises? Mm-hmm.
That's if you have an omniscient point of view. But I think that the truth is that if you have a limited point of view, which is more what people like these days, third person or first person, whatever it is, you only know what the character that is the point of view character for that scene knows. So, if I'm looking at somebody else and I'm saying, oh my God, he's as red as a watermelon, And I can, that's me, the character, the point of view character saying it. It's not the author saying it. So your observations, you're not going to stand around and describe yourself, but you're going to describe other people with attitude, right? With your judgment about them. Do you like them and they're beautiful? If you don't like them, they're ugly, or whatever your view is. So you're always in the role of your point of view character, perceiving all of the other characters. And then if you're stuck, I find it helps to remember what those other characters want that the point of view character doesn't know about, like what you've been talking about. Because they just live their lives and come into this moment in the scene and to interact with this person.
Yeah.
They had a thing they did before and a thing they're doing opposite and a thing they want right now.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Thank you.
You're God as a writer in a way, but not as living it through a scene. You're not God.
Yeah, as a writer, creating.
You might know those things, but you're not. Yeah. The person who's telling the scene doesn't know those things.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a great insight.
So I got a statement. What this woman said about you don't know who's going to, regarding writing a screenplay. A screenplay and a novel, in my estimation, and a play, I mean, like they're three completely different endeavors. And it depends on what kind of novel you're writing. Yours is sort of got some fantasy going on in it.
Yeah, fantasy.
Well, I really wanted my friend to show up today, but she's at the Pflugerville Book Festival trying to sell her second novel. But she's published 2 novels, and this has all happened in the last 5 years. And she told me that, she wrote her first novel, it was a crime novel, and she wrote it because she was tired of all the characters being hot and sexy and tall and thin. And she's short and frumpy and irritable a lot of the time. but it got really good reviews, and she was not writing it to be famous. She was writing because she was just pissed off at all the crime novels that have the swelty. But she told me it was important for her regarding description. That it was important for her because when she realized that it was going to get published, she goes, okay, now some people are going to read this. So she had to go back and add some description because she wanted them to get sucked into her world, that she fell in love with her character.
Oh, like she almost had to consciously make an effort to redefine what a crime novel character is. Like,
it comes easy to her because some people are just gifted, and and it was easy for her. Plus, she was writing about a familiar subject, but she said she's worried because somebody's interested in buying the rights and turning it into a movie, and they may want her to write the screenplay, and I got no clue. What does that look like? So, and
then if her the thing she's most proud of are these characters, you know very well that hopefully she can hold on to being able to at least have say in what the characters look like when they get cast.
She already said that she won't even sell it. If if they're going to change it into a Hollywood glosso, she just forget it.
Yeah.
So when you're acting, you know what the full story is typically. But how often when you're writing do you kind of know where you want to get to in the end?
Yeah, the question is acting when you know sometimes you know the full story, and how does that go with writing? Actually, so I'm going to answer this assuming that we do know the full story, but most of the time, actually, much of the time, especially if you play a supporting role in a bigger project, especially if it's like a hush-hush project, you don't know. But let's assume that you do, and how that's different for writing. Gosh, I'm still on my first egg, and I haven't gone through the entire process. And I'm really trying to hold on to that trust that it'll all come together. That you guys have probably all experienced. And so I don't know anything beyond first draft, but so far. How I found that I write is I found out I'm a pantser. So apparently there's planners and pantsers, right? That's like the common consensus. There's people that work better with plot and it's fully developed, and then they start writing from there. And then there's people that work well just sitting down to write. And I actually found that I have a hard time with plot, and I have a hard time with that, but just sitting down to write works. Now, the reason why I put in that caveat about not finishing the first draft is because I am obviously having trouble with the plot now, because I have my story, and I have a lot of, I have, close to 50,000 words worth of this story that is flowing, but I'm finding how do I go back? Do I start, now that I understand all of these people a lot more, do I use this and then try to infuse this new plot with it, or do I just start over understanding them a lot better, almost like we've had a good run together, now let's start with plot, and I don't know yet. I'm exploring that. I'd be interested to hear what anyone else has to say about, starting, whether who's a planner, who's a pantser. That's up.
Show of hands.
Who's a planner?
Plotter is the word.
Plotter. Thank you. And then everyone else is a pantser? Pantser. Great questions.